This story is part of Before the Carpenter Came, a series from the Cardinal and Dove that explores Old Testament stories that quietly point to Jesus long before he walked among us. Have you ever chosen to stay when leaving would have been easier? Have you ever bound your life to someone else's need, knowing it might cost you comfort, security, or the future you once imagined? Some of the most powerful acts of faith do not begin with miracles. They begin with a decision of the heart. The story of Ruth begins in loss. Naomi had lost her husband. She had lost her sons. She was returning to Bethlehem with grief and very little hope. Her daughters-in-law were free to remain in their homeland. They could return to familiar customs, familiar gods, familiar safety. One did, but Ruth did not. Ruth had grown up worshiping the gods of Moab. Yet when Naomi urged her to go back, Ruth spoke words that changed her life. "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God." This was more than loyalty. It was a turning of the heart. Ruth left behind false worship. She chose the God of Israel. She chose covenant over comfort. Together, they returned to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. They had no land, no provision guaranteed. So Ruth went into the fields to gather what others left behind. Long before that day, God had commanded his people not to harvest their fields completely. The edges were to remain. The fallen grain was to be left for widows and strangers. Even before Ruth entered the field, God had already made room for her. The field belonged to Boaz, a man who honored the Lord. When he learned of Ruth's faithfulness, her care for Naomi, and her decision to seek refuge under the wings of Israel's God, he responded with kindness. He offered protection. He instructed his workers to leave extra grain. What began as survival became a provision, and provision began to look like a blessing. But the story did not end in the field. Boaz was a kinsman redeemer, a man with the right to restore what Naomi's family had lost. In time, he chose to redeem that loss and take Ruth as his wife. From that union came a son. From that family came King David. And generations later, from that same family line came Jesus, the Redeemer who would restore not just one family's loss, but the brokenness of all who turned to him, was born into the story Ruth helped shape. Long before the carpenter came, God was already showing he welcomes those who turn to him in faith. He blesses those who leave behind false hopes and trust him fully. Ruth could not see the future unfolding. She only knew to stay, to serve, to believe. If you find yourself caring quietly, supporting someone who feels forgotten, or walking faithfully after turning toward God, this story speaks gently to you. God sees covenant love. He honors those who stay, and he weaves redemption through decisions that may seem small, but are anything but. Sometimes the greatest act of faith is choosing the true God and remaining faithful. This story comes from the book of Ruth, chapters 1 through 4. The redemption it foreshadows is fulfilled in Jesus, our true Redeemer. If this story encouraged you, please consider liking and subscribing so you can continue walking with us through Before the Carpenter Came. We're glad you're here.